Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our friends and colleagues across the globe joining us today. I'm Mike Sprague. I'm the director of the Polar Institute and the Global Risk and Resilience Program at the Wilson Center. Although 2020 is not yet over, I want to thank the thousands of participants and hundreds of speakers who've joined us over the past year through very trying times for over 24 public events in which we've discussed a broad range of important issues focused on both the Arctic and Antarctic regions. And since so many of you have inquired, yes, I'm pleased to say that we're already begun to schedule next year's programs. So stay tuned and watch our website for updates. And on behalf of the staff, the scholars, fellows of the Institute, we want to thank you all for your support and wish you all a safe and healthy holiday season. I also thank A2A Railway and Laguna Corporation from Wainwright, Alaska, for their steadfast support of our programs and activities throughout the year, as well as our partners throughout the Arctic region, the members of the institutions and organizations of UArctic, and today the Canada Institute for their support of their wonderful program, of their colleagues and their staff, and for always being there for this institute as we are for them and the rest of the Wilson Center support. And thank you falls short of capturing my appreciation for the Wilson Center's media team and the broadcast team and the Wilson Center external relations team. They are the foundation upon which all Wilson Center programs rely. They make our programs possible from the center's broadcast facilities in Washington, D.C., which means a combination of staffing on-site at the Reagan Building at 1300 Pennsylvania Avenue, as well as our remote field stations, meaning their homes. So thank you to John Tyler, Tracy Fitzgerald, Treyon Burgess, Jared Thompson, and the entire team. You never see them, but you would not see us without them. And my thanks to Michaela Stith and Jack Durkee for their continued support of our programs. Arctic Telecommunications and Data Infrastructure, Quintillion Solution for North America. That's the title of today's event. This event is a discussion that a follow-up of a discussion I had earlier this year with the leadership of Quintillion. We discussed their current level of service in Alaska and their future plans to support Alaska's communities, their vision and efforts to support US national and homeland security missions in the Arctic, communities in the Arctic, Canadian Arctic. We discussed the support for US and other allied mission sets in Canada and Greenland, as well as our global vision to connect the North American Arctic to Europe and Asia. These discussions occurred as the global pandemic turned what used to be referred to as a spotlight on the need for better and more reliable and affordable connectivity and communications in the Arctic, and went into what I would now call a heat lamp on these issues. The pandemic has amplified many of the challenges we have in the Arctic and perhaps spurred, out of necessity, some solutions to these challenges. And although communities in the North know these realities all too well, there is a growing realization of the importance of the Arctic when it comes to the larger geopolitical realities of the region and the central role reliable, redundant, and affordable connectivity will play well into the future. The continued evolution of technology, infrastructure, telecommunications, information technology must not leave the Arctic behind. Perhaps two specific programs held by the Polar Institute and partners earlier this year provide some additional context for today's program. This summer, with our partners, we held a program called COVID in the Arctic, led by Dr. Becca Pincus of the Naval War College and Dr. John Farrell of the United States Arctic Research Commission. We had about 10 panels, over 60 speakers. We spoke about research in the Arctic, impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on rural communities, on infrastructure, on education, on families, on food sustainability, water sustainability. No matter what the issue was, the need for redundant, affordable, reliable connectivity was raised in each session. Not as a service that would be nice to have, but as an essential component of everyday life, just as it is for those who do not live in the Arctic. And just this past Friday, we completed the second in a series we call Arctic Security Dialogues with our colleagues at the Arctic Domain Awareness Center. In the past, we spoke about the Air Force's new Arctic strategy, On Friday, we discussed the Army's current efforts to develop their strategy. In the past, we've explored the Coast Guard's Arctic outlook. In each of those discussions, the need for reliable, redundant internet, telecommunications, and data sets were often underscored over and over again. So with this backdrop, I thought it important to invite the leadership of Quintillion to share their vision, including their current network capacities in Alaska, as well as their future plans to support local, state, provincial, regional, national needs throughout the North American Arctic, and importantly, to take your questions. So your participation in this is critical. Please email your questions or your thoughts to polar@wilsoncenter.org, polar@wilsoncenter.org. We have about 90 minutes for this discussion. Let me introduce our panelists. Their full bios are on our website. The first speaker will be Michael Mac McHale. Mac's Quintillion's Chief Revenue Officer with 30 years experience in broadband telecommunications, infrastructure development, and management. Mac has vast experience in the complete spectrum of wireless and wireline broadband network technologies, all facets of delivery service to both the business and consumer markets, and the full gamut of financial responsibilities. Our second speaker is retired United States Army General Chuck Jacoby. Prior to retiring from the military, General Jacoby was the first Army officer to command the North American Aerospace Defense Command, or NORAD, as well as the United States Northern Command, where he led the 1,800-person binational joint headquarters, integrating 35 federal, state, and non-governmental organizations. General Jacoby also commanded U.S. Army Alaska and was the Deputy Commander of Alaska Command. And our final speaker is George Tronfer III, Chief Executive Officer. A graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point, he served in the U.S. Army as an airborne Ranger infantry officer from 1978 to 1983, until a line of duty accident resulted in his medical disability retirement from the Army. George has 20 years of prior experience in wireless, fiber optic, and telecom infrastructure in more than 70 major U.S. markets. So now it's a pleasure to begin the program by opening up the virtual floor to Mac. Mac, please take away the virtual floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Appreciate those nice introductions. We also appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to speak to this audience and to share the Quintillion story and our perspective on technology development in the Arctic. So Alaska has long been recognized as a very strategic place in the world. And although it has natural advantages, there remains areas where we can further leverage those advantages. So specifically, the Arctic has lacked telecommunications infrastructure, the kind of infrastructure that's necessary to participate, compete, and take a leadership role in an increasingly digital world with secure, scalable, reliable broadband networks. So several years ago, Quintillion's investors recognized this need, and they took action to initiate that development and built a subsea fiber optic network in the U.S. Arctic region. Really did what no other company had attempted or achieved, and built the subsea network to connect Alaskans initially, but also to position Alaska as an international broadband gateway through the Arctic. So mission accomplished so far in at least phase one. And what I'd like to do for the next 4 slides is give an overview of Quintillion's current status, some expansion plans, and then some active projects. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So the Quintillion network in phase one is a network that basically spans 1,200 miles from the west coast of Alaska up through the North Slope, and specifically in the Seward Peninsula to Prudhoe Bay. It has landing stations depicted by the red lines on the map here in Nome, Kotzebue, Point Hope, Wainwright, Utqiagvik, and then the network drops down into Prudhoe Bay. There are, so like I said, there's 6 cable landing stations there, and that's a 10 terabit 3-pair fiber optic network. In Prudhoe Bay, the network then connects to our terrestrial network and goes in 2 different directions. The first goes south to Fairbanks, Anchorage, and down to the lower 48, where it connects into the major internet exchanges in Seattle and Hillsborough. The other from Prudhoe Bay heads west about 60 miles into the oil and gas infield, where it provides services to that industry. Now, what we do at each of our cable landing stations is we interconnect with the incumbent telephone companies or broadband providers in those areas. And we primarily deliver Ethernet private line wholesale services to those companies who further distribute it to consumers and businesses in those areas. Now, when you look at the challenges of those subsea connections, we've really built this network in a manner that was really built to last. So there's some very harsh environment, as we all know, short ice-free seasons, and limited logistical support in the area. So this system is really built with kind of a hardened mentality, which is very high quality fiber optics. The main trunk line is buried 12 feet below the seabed floor, and the branch landings go as deep as 80 feet below the seabed floor to avoid the risk of ice scour, errant anchors, and geological disturbances. So, with that network in place, we go ahead and we're continuing to expand from those landing stations inland and go further into the interior of Alaska. We're using fiber optics, we're using microwave, other various wireless technologies to facilitate access to frontier markets more and more. So that is kind of what I'll call, this is the first phase of like a 3-phase strategy, which I'll call and keep it really simple. We call it the in, the out, and the up strategy. So phase 1 really depicts the in, and we'll go into phase 2 and phase 3 in the next couple of slides, and you'll see how what we're looking for is this phase 1 to be kind of the center point or the fulcrum for our future expansions. So we can go to the next slide. So phase 2 in our planning, we're extending from Washington State to Japan. We're extending from Alaska to Washington State, and that very simply achieves the kind of route diversity, and it's a very low latency route, which will create that connection to Asia, but also create diversity and redundancy for Alaska. So this is in phase 2, which is in planning right now. Next slide, please. In phase 3, this represents our expansion east, where we're connecting from Aliktok Point on the far eastern side of our phase 1 network into Canada, into Tuktoyaktuk, and then we'll extend from there over to Greenland and London, and possibly Iceland as well. So we're looking at all those various options. So what you have here now is again that broadband gateway through the Arctic that will essentially represent the lowest latency route that never really even touches land except for the landing stations along the way. So go to the next slide, please. So we've just talked about rounding out this vision of creating an Arctic Silk Road from Asia through North America to Europe. And that represents kind of the in and the out aspect of our strategy. And the next step for us is to go up. And we can move to the next slide. I'll talk about that for a second. So we have an active project in place right now where we are essentially building, along with our partner, Atlas Space Operations, we are building the highest latitude in the U.S. Ground station, which is 320 miles above the Arctic Circle. And we are in the process right now of installing the first antenna, which is an X and S band facility at the location. The installation is underway as we speak. We will be substantially complete with that this month, and we'll go into testing in January of 2021 and be in live operations in the first quarter of 2021. So, we think that's a really neat, interesting option for for polar orbit satellite operators who are looking for options in high latitude locations. And we think there's some real advantages to that. So that sort of kind of rounds out the in, out, and up strategy. And we expect this installation, along with our phase one network and expansions in both directions, to have an economic impact locally, but also more globally as well, because we think that data from space is just as important as data from major metropolitan areas, which is what most fiber optic network operators are looking for. So we think they're all very important, and we're going to continue on the in, out, and up strategy. So when you look at what is the long term, or what's the end game for Quintillion, it is to continue on our expansion inward to serve Alaskans, and to continue to drive into those frontier markets using, providing our bread and butter services, using whatever technologies make sense. It's to go out and connect with our neighbors in Asia and in Europe, and to do that in a low latency, very unique route. And it's to go up and connect to bring data down from space, bring it into a secure location, and connect that directly to the internet with terabit speeds of fiber. So all of this is, it's broadband connectivity. It's a necessary underpinning to the modern Arctic, commerce and defense infrastructure. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to a gentleman who's we're very fortunate to have on our team at Quintillion, General Chuck Jacoby, and he'll provide all with his perspective on secure networks and defense strategy and other very important initiatives. So with that, I'll turn it over to General Jacoby.
Yeah, thanks, Mac, and thanks, Mike, and all the team from the Wilson Center. I'm really delighted to be here and to be able to talk to you about the Arctic and about some of the security requirements and security challenges in the Arctic. My last assignment in the United States Army after almost 37 years was to command NORAD and U.S. Northern Command. And that was following a couple of assignments before when I was U.S. Army Alaska. So I was familiar with the challenges of the environment as commander of U.S. Army Alaska, but I wasn't quite as familiar with the geopolitical and strategic challenges that all come together in this Arctic region, and for the United States in Alaska. And so it's Jimmy, or the Billy Mitchell quote earlier really led to decades of military focus, understanding the strategic importance of Alaska, but it was really pointed south towards the Pacific. A lot of interest in how close and how important it was to be able to provide capabilities in Alaska for focused on Pacific Command operations. But it wasn't until after the Cold War and the continued advance of technology, and also the opening of the Arctic because of global climate changes, that we also began to realize that our gaze needed to shift up to the north, to the Arctic itself, and recognizing that, as we say now, that really the most important frontline defense of the homeland is in the Arctic. And we really find that to be true. And all you have to do is look at the map from the polar perspective, and you see how critical it is to all of our major competitors. A lot of people are aware that we have entered into or re-entered a world where major power competition is a fact of life, and we deal with it every day across all domains, from not just from defense, but information and economic competition. And all of the competitors believe they have either a direct or indirect stake in the opening of the Arctic, which makes rethinking Alaska and the Arctic in terms of our sovereign interests much more expansively than it did during the Cold War. So in the Cold War, NORAD was developed where Canada and the United States agreed to share sovereign interests in a defense standpoint in certain specific capabilities in the Arctic, in the North, in order to deal with the emerging Soviet threat. It started with bombers, with strategic bombers that could reach the North American homeland for both Canada and the United States, and then it evolved into early warning against ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles that would come over the pole. And so many of the distances and so many of the capabilities that deal with aerospace and space itself, really the most convenient and the most efficient way to approach North America is over the pole or through the Arctic area. And so that's where we stood to a certain extent as we closed out the Cold War. And because of the removal of a threat that was extant and visible and very tangible, and all the people around the world understood that threat. When that seemed to diminish and go away, there was a lack of investment in what we had developed up in the Arctic, which was as modern as we had at the time, early warning and defensive capability. And by the time I got to NORAD in 2011, the North Warning System, the old DEW line, other capabilities were just a shadow of themselves from the past. Canada and the United States were still committed to it, but the investments weren't there. But over time, and most recently, the changes in the environment in the Arctic, and also the changes in technology and the capabilities and the importance of space and the importance of cyberspace and the electromagnetic spectrum and all of the other enablers for modern conflict made the Arctic yet again one of the most, if not the most relevant area for us to think about how do we defend North America, the United States, and how do we deter threats to the homeland. So I was delighted to be invited to become part of Quintillion, and because they provide a really foundational capability to addressing what have become significant gaps in our capability in Alaska and in the Arctic. And I'll just go through those real quickly. The first is communications. Obviously, if you can't communicate, you cannot deter, and you cannot compete, and you cannot fight in any of the geographical areas in the world. It's particularly difficult in the high north. Above 60 communications is an enormous problem, and really the best, and thankfully the existing solution to all the problems with electromagnetic interference, with latency and delays, with speed, with bandwidth that you have with satellite and with UHF and VHF. Most of those are solved when you're dealing with fiber optic. And the fact that we have this capability in place, but more importantly, that there is the ability to establish increasingly robust infrastructure throughout the Arctic region is really attractive to all the services. Now, you've heard from the services on their strategies, and I'll just tell you from the perspective of the US Northcom commander and NORAD commander, I didn't just think of the Arctic and Alaska as a spot on the map or a responsibility. It's really an area of operations, and Arctic communications and dealing with the problems above 60 is really not acceptable to match today's threat. And so fiber is a good way to get started in meeting the communication gaps that we have up north. And you'll see that as I talk about the other gaps in domain awareness, enabling infrastructure and general presence, you really require communications to fill those gaps and being able to pass data in large quantities. That's required to meet our problems across all of those gaps. And so after the communications problem, domain awareness. As I mentioned earlier, we put up a lot of radars throughout Alaska and Canada to meet the challenge of strategic bombers from Russia. And but that was a very specific domain. Then we had to further develop to meet the early warning requirement for intercontinental ballistic missiles. But now the requirement is much broader. And the Arctic is also home to other domains that are avenues of approach for threat, interference, competition, or attack against North American interests, sovereign interests. And that includes cyber, that includes space, that includes surface sea, subsurface sea in new and very robust ways, and across the electromagnetic spectrum. So it's important that we realize that our early warning system that we became so confident in and so dependent on is no longer adequate for the requirements of the 21st century to provide the very first and most important thing that we've always done in the past, which is provide senior leaders early warning of threats so they can make strategic decisions in a timely manner. Next thing is enabling infrastructure. It is really, so why is it hard to invest in the Arctic? Because it's hard to build things in the Arctic. There are seasons, there are challenges with, even though the ice is melting and the climate has changed, it is still a harsh environment. It is a unique environment. It takes very, very special skills like Quintillion brings to the table to be able to create infrastructure in the high north. And so there isn't sufficient infrastructure. And there's only so many runways, and there are very, very few ports, and the ones that are there are not year-round capable in a way we need them to be. And there are not a lot of roads and not a lot of railroads. And so there is an infrastructure requirement that is enabled by things like better communications and better awareness of what the requirements are. So that infrastructure, and I'll talk about this just before I finish, we need to address that as a fundamental job, and probably job one here in the Arctic. And again, in today's world, communications is an enabling infrastructure all by itself. And then general presence. We've had a presence in the high north. As I said, it used to be focused very much to the south. We are changing that focus to address the current requirements. You probably heard from the other services how they're addressing that, but we need to increase our presence, increase our fingertip feel for what is going on in the environment. And we need to do that from taking care of our own citizens and taking care of our communities and especially our native communities, and taking care of the environment. And part of that is to also be able to deter threats and respond to them. And whether those threats are climatic or whether they're big power or whether they're third-party threats. And so that general presence needs to be increased. And again, that's another investment. And it's also something that is closing that gap, is greatly enabled by improving our communications and data passing capabilities. So those are kind of the big gaps. And, I looked at the capability Quintillion brought to the table and said, boy, this is a good way to start getting after some of these problems. We can't buy everything at once. We can't do everything at once. So we need to do the most important, the foundational things first. And I know that the services talk to you in those terms as well. Partnerships. I consider partnerships to be really one of the critical investments that we have to make, and it's finding other parties that will join with us in overcoming some of the obstacles that come with expanding into this frontier in the Arctic. And really our partnerships start geopolitically. NATO is a big partner. There are many NATO countries that are either directly or indirectly concerned with sovereign interests in the Arctic. And of course, Canada is our best and most reliable ally over the years. And we share the North American landscape across the Arctic in a very special way. And we have agreed to and successfully cooperated and worked together to defend and deter in the North and to take care of our citizens together in the North, and we should continue to do so. Other partners, the state of Alaska is a huge partner, and really the state congressional delegation, but also state leadership have all been very, very good allies in moving forward to try to create the capabilities and the efforts to close some of these gaps, but also to take care of the commercial interests and the economic interests and the informational interests, and especially the interests of our citizens who live in the high North. And then across the board, there are many, many other partners in the federal government, from Department of Homeland Security, which includes the Coast Guard, to all the folks that get involved in monitoring the environment and taking care of all the things that the federal government takes on as areas of interest for them. And then finally, I would say that commercial sector has to be part of the partnering process, whether it's big companies that are looking to how to carefully and judiciously take advantage of resources in the high North, or whether they're universities. For instance, the universities in Alaska and in Canada have some of the really the foremost knowledgeable folks on how to deal with the Arctic and how the Arctic is evolving over time. And so everyone needs to work in partnership to really open this frontier. And that is really kind of the tradition of the military in the North. And I'll just close by saying that no one wants to militarize the Arctic, from Canada or the United States or NATO. But the fact of the matter is that all of the frontiers that we have experienced opening, the military and the federal government have been partners in moving forward as the frontiers have opened up, just like it did in our West and just like it's done in space in the past. And so the United States military is a responsible and good partner for all of the folks that have an interest in opening up the Arctic responsibly. And to that end, what we can do to help foundational capabilities like Quintillion achieve their potential, that's a good thing. And it's in keeping with our traditions. We had a little map there. I guess I'll go back to the little airplanes. I know everybody likes to, can we go back one? Look at the little airplanes. I would just say a couple things, and then I'll close out. And under Under Secretary Mattis and General Dunford, we had a national military strategy that identified Russia, China, North Korea, and Iran as our four major state competitors. And if you look at the map, you can just see that 3 out of 4 of them are right there, have tremendous interest for us from a deterrence and defense perspective in Alaska and across the Arctic. And anyone that puts things into space and relies on space, or sends missiles through space, is going to do it over the polar region and take advantage of the Arctic and the distance differential that you get there. And so that just increases the importance and the necessity to invest responsibly in what we're doing in the Arctic. The Russians are doing it. They've reopened many of their Cold War Arctic bases. They are conducting exercises throughout the Arctic. They see it as a sovereign interest for them to not just exploit, but to operate in a defensive manner throughout the Arctic. And China, which doesn't have is 900, closest part of China is 900 miles away from the Arctic, considers itself an Arctic or a wannabe Arctic nation. And you can see from the map here that China is investing not just in many icebreakers and capabilities to operate in the Arctic, but also investing in relationships on the periphery of the Arctic in order to gain significant influence. So I'll close out here by saying I'm delighted to be here with Wilson Center, eager to answer any questions you might have, and happy that we've got so many people that are interested in the Arctic. It's a sea change from what we've had over the previous decade. And there's lots to do everywhere, but there are certain places that you really can't turn a blind eye to. And one of them, the most important one, I think, that we're talking about today is the Arctic. Thank you.
Thank you very much, General. And thank you for your service to this nation. George, this is a perfect transition now to you. Max set us up very well with the general overview. General Jacoby has provided insight from the Alaska perspective, the North American perspective, and I would say a global perspective. As the CEO of this organization, let me hand over visions for the future.
I'm mute.
I think you're muted, George.
You gotta teach the guy how to do this.
This does not instill confidence.
Yeah, well, so be it. Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Mac and Chuck, for the comments. I will try not to over repeat what you guys said, but try and tie things together and shift to question and answer. I've been the CEO of the company here since July, August of 2017. And, what intrigued me about this early on were a number of things. I mean, Mike said during my my overview that, I was in the Army, and I was in the Army with Chuck and many others that have either recently retired or still in service. And I never intended to get out, but I did. And, ended up kind of falling into telecommunications and stayed in that area for, better part of 30 years now. And most of that was in fiber optics. Some of it was in wireless. All of it was from the transition of the old analog telephony to digital. And, all of I'm sure, when we went through that process, we see, things that were huge being reduced to much smaller footprints, and, signals being converted from electronic signals to digital signals, capacity massively increasing. And, I was in the middle of all that from, 1983 to, through 2003. And what particularly intrigued me about this opportunity, one was the location. I saw Alaska as a strategic U.S. asset, North American asset, in a region that was clearly changing, was clearly going to be a dominant factor in the next several decades ahead. And that was something that was new to me. And, you know, I'm not too old to learn something new. So that was a big attraction, but more so, you know, I'd never been involved with a submarine project before. So that was a new learning experience. But when I looked at, you know, what is this, what could we do with this company? And, you know, it was very clear to me that we could change people's lives and we can change the national defense and national security posture of our country in an area that's becoming much more globally strategic in a lasting way for several decades. So the first of those was readily apparent when I got to Alaska. Our system was not yet operational. That didn't happen until December of 2017. But the communities that we serve, from Nome to Prudhoe Bay, the people that live there, work there, go to school there, and the companies that are based there, you know, about the only broadband they had available to them was through a satellite system. And, you know, maybe they could get a couple of megs, and, you know, latency and reliability issues. It hit me very clearly. These population of 30,000 some people and many significant companies were still locked in the 1980s in terms of how they lived and how they did business, you know, every day that they lived in these areas. We were able to dramatically shift that starting in December 2017 when we completed the network and turned up service in our markets. And, you know, we still have ways to go there, and I'm sure there'll be some questions on that. But, you know, we have essentially brought the North Slope of Alaska and the Northwest Arctic part of Alaska from the 1980s into the 21st century here. And, you know, today we serve the large majority of the people who live and work in these communities, the colleges, the hospitals, the clinics, all kinds of public service opportunities, the corporate entities that operate businesses there, the oil and gas companies that are in our largest oil and gas reserve that is domestic to us. And, you know, we've made a huge difference there. And I think we've only begun. So when we look at what we have ahead in the future with various expansion plans, I think that's going to continue to improve and close the gap on the digital divide, you know, at least in our markets where we can reach today. There's still other parts of Alaska that are very, very rural and are going to continue to have challenges for some time. The second was, you know, national defense and national security. How can we make a change there? And every market that I visited, you know, I always go around trying to find military facilities. There are a number of them. They're very old, as Chuck said. These are radar systems that were put in position for mission in the late 50s and early 60s, not 2020. Some of them are still operational, but, you know, they use about as much bandwidth as it would take to you know, download a picture that was very poor quality. Whereas the new national defense, national security systems in our country and in Alaska are, you know, 1,400 miles away, where there was fiber optic infrastructure. So we saw the same thing happen. You know, these systems were obsolete because they were not, you know, new digital systems. They, you know, would require 1 or 2 megabit of backhaul as opposed to a gig plus for some of the new modern, you know, radar and ground sensor types systems that we have deployed elsewhere in our country, but nowhere on the coast of Alaska, nowhere in the high north, nowhere in the true Arctic. And so when you get that high, you just think of, you know, from a basic engineering point of view, you know, your curvature of the earth, your propagation of those signals, the effectiveness of those type systems are going to be significant at the coast of Alaska as opposed to the interior of Alaska. So we've spent a lot of time briefing Stratcom, MDA, Northcom, NORAD, Spacecom on the capabilities that Mac and Chuck have described, and how we can support new systems for national security, national defense that are ground-based and on the coast of Alaska. And we've recently hired a chief security officer to help us with that, because part of that job is going to entail upgrades to physical security in some of these locations, when new systems get deployed. So that was pretty much what we spent the first year and a half or so doing. Then we began to look at the routes. The routes that Mac walked you through, those are all actively underway. The lines in those maps are not exact lines or specific lines. We are working with partners on the expansion to Asia and the expansion to Europe. Some of those are international partners, some of those are cloud partners, some of those are telecom and other cable providers like us, who have a joint interest and believe that this is worth doing. We're working with some international defense industries to assist in that as well. And we're going to try to make that happen in the next several years. I think we'll see our Trans-Pacific project and at least portions of the Trans-European project come online in the 2023 timeframe. Many of those we hope will start this year in the planning stages. And as Mac explained, and I think Chuck explained, doing anything in the Arctic is difficult and has its own unique challenges, and it takes time, and there's shortened seasons to do this work. But we know how to do it because we have already done it, and we're the only company that's done it in the North American Arctic. And we know how to do it with, and we're going to leverage those relationships to be able to extend that infrastructure. And along that infrastructure, give us the ability to serve the same kind of markets that we have served in Alaska, the same type of national defense and national security systems that we believe need to be deployed. But the newest one is space. About a year and a half ago, Mac and I went to the Space Symposium, and I was blown away by the amount of investment that is going to be launched into space in the next decade. A large majority of those are going to be polar orbiting satellites, where you need to have downlink facility that is in the high north to be able to get that data as it passes the globe in a polar orbit somewhere around 14 times a day. And from Barrow, or Utqiagvik, we had the new name on there, but it's really Barrow for those of you who aren't aware of that. From Barrow, we're at 72 degrees latitude, and the highest place in the globe that is on U.S. soil and U.S. owned and operated infrastructure, which is unique, not only for any nation that has polar orbiting satellites. We're also much farther to the west than the existing operations at Svalbard. But for U.S. owned and operated companies and critical data, critical infrastructure, both classified and unclassified, this is a unique opportunity to be able to provide services that just simply aren't available in the world today. And we're at work on that right now with the antenna that Mac described and showed you a picture of. That will be up and running in January of 2021. So we're inside of 60 days there. We have the ability to expand on that pad, and we have the ability to expand in a much larger fashion on adjacent pads that would give us a real growth opportunity there. So we're fast at work talking to the global cloud providers about putting processing on the ground at the point of our download of data from space. So you look at our Barrow antenna today, and you can just see it as an aperture for the entire space community that's going to be in a polar orbit or in a high geostationary orbit that's going to be looking at this part of the globe. And we have the ability to be the gateway to the community in space that is going to do nothing but grow over the next decade and beyond. And I think the significance, both strategically and tactically, from a national defense point of view and from many other points of view, it's going to be an enormous opportunity that we can uniquely provide services on that are going to bring value to various elements that see that as an opportunity. So I think processing at the edge there right now from Barrow to Seattle, the round trip latency is 55 milliseconds. If we have cloud computing on our pad at the point of download, that data can immediately be processed and we can eliminate the latency and provide a real-time service integration of data for analytics, monetization, what have you. So all of that is going to be an opportunity that I didn't envision in 2017. Most of my career has been on the ground, and to me that was another wonderful thing about the Quintillion infrastructure that I didn't realize. I don't think our investor realized, and I don't think DoD or other potential federal clients realized that we had such an opportunity to do that here on U.S. soil. So those are kind of the things that are driving our team. We have a small team. There's roughly a dozen of us. We're fortunate to have Chuck as one of our strategic advisors with specific background and information on Alaska, on the Arctic, on Canada, many functional and current relationships there that can help us on a number of the initiatives that we've all talked about. We also have another retired four-star, John Campbell, who is a special counselor to our board. JC and Chuck have complementary relationships. JC has prior experience as the 34th Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, so he's very familiar with Washington D.C., the Pentagon, Capitol Hill, and whatnot. How to get things through budgets, how to talk at a strategic level on requirements. So we are all united, our small team, in working this opportunity for the good of the communities that we serve, for the good of Alaska, changing people's lives for the better, and making a meaningful contribution to the improvement of national defense, national security of our country and of North America for decades in the future. And it's our honor to be in a position to be able to do that. It's our honor to be able to talk to you about it today. And I think I'll pass it back over to Mike and put myself back on mute and see if there are some questions that we can answer to everybody's satisfaction. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you, George, very much for that. I can tell you that as all three of you have been speaking, we've been getting emails from Alaska and outside the state of Alaska as well. So let me ask a question of both George and Mac, just to start with. What are your goals for getting all rural indigenous communities connected to high-speed internet? And how will you try to keep those costs down?
You want me to start with that, George?
Yeah, what about you, Mac?
Yeah. Okay.
You're right in the middle of it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I don't know that we can ever get service to all, but we can continue to push inward from our cable landing stations. And we're doing that with various partners. We're tapping into various federal programs on the USAC, FCC front, trying to take best advantage of the E-rate programs, rural health programs, which will essentially subsidize the building of additional infrastructure, which then can be leveraged to deliver service, further into those frontier markets. So an example of that, right now we have a project underway to work with the RUS, the USDA and the RUS, the Rural Utility Service, to extend our service in the Bering Straits region. That will be filed in the next few days. No guarantee we'll win that, but we are taking those steps to continue to push further and further inland. We're also looking at opening up our terrestrial networks as well, where we have add drop locations, repeater sites, where we can tap into the fiber using point-to-point licensed microwave technology to extend further into the interior as well. So it is definitely a priority for us. It's a long haul. It's not something that happens overnight, especially when you're looking at some of the rugged terrain in Alaska. So that's those are the objectives and the strategies associated with those objectives. And we're going to continue to look for any opportunity that's out there to help subsidize infrastructure, and to the extent we're able to provide services to military installations and federal government. Again, we can then leverage that those systems to go across markets to small business and consumers as well, and leverage that same infrastructure. And I'll turn it over to George to see if he wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, a couple things. Anyone who's been in telecommunications for more than 10 years figures out pretty quick that there's always one party that will innovate. There's one party that will go do something that someone else hasn't done before. And most of the rest of the community will stand on the side and either say nothing or stand on the side and express disbelief. And then if it works, everybody tries to figure out how to copy it and put it in place somewhere else that could support it. So I think one of the things that we're looking to do here is, we know what we do, and we do that well. I think we do it, better than most companies that are in this business. But there's other technologies that are changing as well that are going to be complementary to us in terms of both the technology itself and the area that it can serve. And so we're actively in discussion with other parties about how we could integrate our effort with their effort, whether they're going to be a broadband provider or a cloud provider or something that's going to add value to what we offer to our client base, whether they're a residential consumer or whether they're a business or a government client. So, I think, to hold the cost down, Mike, this is very expensive to do. So to hold the cost down, I think we've got to make smart partnerships, which Chuck talked about. We've got to go after grants and other sources, which Mac talked about. But I think there's just some good tactical partnerships that we can pursue with other technologies that would give us the ability to provide more and better service to more geographically dispersed clients within the state of Alaska. And then as we expand our infrastructure, other areas that we serve that are going to have the same kind of problem. So, we are looking at that. That's an active part of our 2021 to 2023 strategy, and up to and including merger and acquisition with other entities where it makes sense to do that, and both parties are motivated and excited to pursue a discussion like that.
Thank you, George. Thank you, Mac. I know that in discussions I mentioned during the COVID-19 in the Arctic program, we had community members telling us that because of COVID-19 and the need for them to provide not just basic educational service for their students, for their kids while in school, but they also had to work to keep their income coming in, of course. And we know that folks were paying between $500, $600, $700 a month for somewhere around, I wrote it down, 10 megabytes for their residential service. So as much as we talk about these global needs and national needs and the really important things for our nation, we're getting a lot of questions about what does this mean for Alaska and Alaskan communities that aren't part of the great big cities, Anchorage, Fairbanks, Juneau. So I think that's going to be a recurring issue in our questioning, but also I just want to highlight the number of questions that we have on this particular issue, how vital it is for the partnerships to be in place to drive down the course to the cost of these for a lot of our community members. To that point, you've all talked about the need for leveraging current needs, current infrastructure, and then leveraging that going forward, like DOD in our national defense and civil security capacities. So I have a specific question for General Jacoby. The question is, do you envision the FY21 DoD budget to include additional resources to help enhance telecommunications infrastructure in the state of Alaska?
Hey, thanks, Mike, and to whoever asked that question. Look, I think that, the bill that hopefully gets signed here shortly and the NDAA that's got provisions for looking at the North Warning System, I'm hoping that's a weather change for thinking hard about what do we need to support Alaska and support the Arctic and the military requirements up there. Will there be investments coming out of it? I hope it's like an onion. I hope once they start peeling back the North Warning System issues, they're going to find, oh my goodness, there's a lot of layers to this. There's a lot of missing pieces to this. And at the base of the missing pieces is going to be, what are the infrastructure requirements, such as communications. And that's where you start these programs. So there are some things we don't need to start a 15-year research project on. I mean, maybe, over the horizon radars above 60, we've been researching the heck out of that forever. And I hope to goodness we come up with something soon, but we haven't yet. But Quintillion knows how to put cable down underwater. They've done it. They do it. They know how to get it through the permafrost. They know how to get it into communities. And they know how, when you get it to a community, it's going to be like, lighting the fire that everybody huddles around. There'll be the community huddled around it. There'll be the, Coast Guard huddled around it, and DOD huddled around it, and the state of Alaska and the University of Fairbanks in Alaska. And then it'll expand from there. And so that's what I'm hoping happens. I'm hoping that there's going to be and I know the folks that are going to answer this question that was brought up in the NDA are going to look hard at this, and they're going to come back and it will allow a peeling of the onion that people are going to say, we've got a whole lot of things to worry about, a whole lot of things that need money, but there are only a handful of must-dos. And this is one of the must-dos.
Thank you, General. I appreciate that. As I mentioned before, I think all three of you have noted Alaska as the fulcrum for your broader vision. So as you might imagine, we're getting a lot of questions from Alaska, but also other questions related to research, national security, leveraging state assets as well. So I'm going to come back to some of those. But first, I want to go to a question by my friend and colleague, Doug Isaacson, who asks, what policies on the state and federal level might be required to help you realize the vision that you have for Quintillion and the state of Alaska?
So, Mike,
I would open that up to anyone who wants to speak to that issue.
okay, so let me take a stab at that, and then Matt can probably jump on and add some detail. So we're talking, this is state and local or state and federal?
State and federal.
State and federal. Okay. One of the things that I was thinking when I was listening to Chuck answer that last question is that we don't do anything in a vacuum here. We have regular discourse and conversation with the Alaska government, and I think Mac just recently briefed the governor of Alaska in the last week or so on some various projects that we've talked with. Similarly, whenever we go to DC, we will meet with the Alaska delegation, and we recently had a call on this NDAA subject with Senator Murkowski, and Chuck was on that call. They know each other, but both senators and Congressman Young, we keep, their we're doing and what we need and how they can help support us on a regular basis, whether or not that's a military issue or a broadband issue or commercial issue. I think beyond that, we talk to the cities as well. We've had Mac and I had a call within the last 30 days with the North Slope Borough mayor's office, and we had 3 or 4 individuals there talking to them about some initiatives to include this larger pad for economic development of the ground station business. If that takes off as we believe it could, that's going to provide economic development benefits for Barrow and for all of Alaska. When you think about multiple 10s or 20 ground stations there, cloud services, and the business that goes with that from a job point of view, from a presence point of view. And as that business would grow, we're going to need to continue to invest in our network for diversified routes. And some of that money may come from state, some of that may come from federal grants programs, but some of it will come from our investor if we present our investor with a business case that makes sense and accomplishes multiple objectives in a given market that serve all of those needs and clients. Same as we go out of Alaska and particularly across Canada towards Greenland, Iceland. We're already in discussion with those entities. So we're not doing anything in a vacuum here. We keep our eyes open for new creative ways to provide infrastructure, either through grants, loans, partners who have aligned objectives, and as we do that, we always look at how can we extend the benefit, bring people from the 1980s to 2020 along that path, and if we can prove in a new route somewhere that has an extensive addition to our network, then the idea of dropping off of that route as we build it, or identifying it to do that so that we can serve communities along the way, that only makes sense. And I think our company is, I believe we've proven ourselves as a good citizen in the markets that we're in the state that we're in, and we'll continue to do that as we move forward with our various expansion plans. So I don't know, Mac, if you have anything to add?
Yeah, a couple of things, George, to add. So first of all, greetings to Doug, who I do know and have talked to, and hopefully, we together tried to solve some problems in the past. It was all good. I want to reiterate what George just said. I think we've been in the mode of keeping everybody informed with what we're doing. And, we do endeavor to, whenever we're making an expansion or we're looking for a particular grant or for instance, the ground station installation, we go out of our way to keep the entire state delegation up to speed on those developments, as well as the FCC and USAC and so on. So I think the one area, and it's not really developed yet, but I think that Alaska is not able, because of the Alaska Plan, which was adopted in 2017, is not able to take advantage of the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. And from Quintillion's perspective, we weren't even an entity at that point. And so we're talking with our attorneys right now to look at approaches that we might take to kind of change that. And that's a big pot of money to do exactly what it is we're all talking about here, which is to deliver broadband into rural areas. So I bring that out as a foreshadowing, not as a fait accompli, but something that we're looking at doing and we'll continue to push on. So, and I'll also, open up and say, we're open to ideas, and we're always willing to listen. And, with that, good things tend to happen. So, more on the local level, we try to do the same thing and keep folks informed with what our plans are, so that to the extent there's a way to leverage those or to, partner up with another entity that can further expand, we're open to that too. So we're not fiber centric, we're solution centric. So fiber connected to microwave, fiber connected to satellite. whatever works. We are, I mean, our mentality is let's propagate broadband throughout the state and not necessarily have to own the whole thing, but partner with folks that can help us do that. So exclamation point on that. So again, thanks for the question, Doug.
Thank you, Mac. Thank you, George. We have about 20 minutes left, and I have a number of questions still pending from the audience. So I want to try to work through these as quick as possible. General Jacoby, perhaps you can talk to an issue that's come up here, and that is about security. Mac, George, please weigh in. But the security, how secure this network is for everything from basic research, data, to the national and civil security requirements that this might provide.
Well, first of all, nobody needs to steal fiber optic technology. Okay, this is a known quantity, and one of the things that's known about it is how secure it is. And to tell you the truth, I'm a happy camper if you've buried it, on the seafloor, and you know exactly where you've buried it, and the right people know exactly where you buried it and what are the capabilities of it. And so I am much more confident right now in the security of fiber than I am with the kinds of things that can happen in the electromagnetic spectrum and across, the cyber world. And so I feel pretty good about that. I have, as I said, less concern. I think that Mac and George could probably talk more so to the details of that. To me, though, the most important thing is reliability. And along with security comes a much higher degree of reliability and capacity. And so the bang for the buck with what you put down. And in the end, a lot of security is based on your risk equation. Okay, so how important is it for you? And if it's important enough, you'll invest in the security aspect of it. As George mentioned, when we get, landing sites, we're gonna have to invest in some ground security, but not prohibitive costs. But if it's important to you, invest in it. If it's still within your profit margin to write off, who's getting some stuff from you, then maybe you're not investing sufficiently in it. So I think that with fiber, the additional investment required to upgrade security and those kinds of things are much more within the risk equation of not just the DoD, but of communities and states and other commercial partnerships and those kinds of things. What's a bigger risk is leaving communities out and leaving the Arctic out of the technology pace that's being set right now. I think you have a bigger risk of not competing in that realm. So those are my thoughts on that.
I'll add some to that, and then I'm sure George can amplify. But I mean, on the existing phase 1 network, as I mentioned earlier, we have the main trunk line is buried 12 feet below the sea floor. The landing branches are 80 feet below the sea floor. We've hired a chief security officer to work with Team Telecom and others to make sure all of our landing stations are at a level that is considered secure and qualified for government and military type installations. As far as international expansion, I mean, we'll be looking at the security question, very seriously, and making sure that we do everything right. I mean, right now, our phase 1 network is, we have belt and suspenders and thumbtacks and everything else on that network to make sure that we don't have issues. And fortunately, that's been the case so far. So, our continued focus is not to do, not to do it inexpensively and cut corners and have operations and maintenance issues down the road. Our approach is to do it right, so that it is a quality installation. The uptime is maximized, and we sleep better at night with that. So, George, to you.
Yeah, a couple of things. Our network went live December 2017. We have not had an outage on the subsea network. There have been a couple of terrestrial outages, but our cumulative reliability per Chuck's point is 99.999 on the network as a whole from December 2017 through the present. The cable, in addition to being buried, is a double armored cable, which is much more expensive than a no armored cable or a single armored cable. And so I think, our investor, when they got behind this project, they went to every length possible to be able to provide, physical security of the cable itself. Over key branching units where we have, a landing that would come ashore, we have concrete revetments that are over those branching units. And those have now settled into the sea. I'm not even sure if they're visible anymore. We're designated critical infrastructure from Team Telecom. We had a Team Telecom team that had representatives from the FBI, DOJ, DHS, DOD, and DISA all out to do a physical inspection and brief on our network, to include network management and network monitoring in May of 2019. There were some minor suggestions that we have taken, and one of those was hiring Lance Dubsky as our chief security officer. Lance now has the whole security 360 security, so physical, cyber, electronic, engineering, and we're in the process of doing a self-assessment just so that we can adhere to and comply with the CMMC standards that are going into effect in 2021 for all providers to DoD or U.S. government service. So, I think if you look at our cable system, one of the things we're considering doing is having a third-party evaluation of our system that would produce a report and provide some comparatives. This would be from an entity that's probably done systems like this for 20 or more submarine cable systems over the last couple of decades. That's something that we're looking to embark upon in Q1. So we take that extremely seriously. We are highly invested into the security in every aspect as it pertains to our system and our infrastructure, as well as to our clients and our potential clients.
Thank you, the three of you, for answering that important question. We did have a number of questions on security, everything from the actual security of the cable itself to obviously those who might want to create some havoc, let's just put it that way, with access to the data and to the cable as well. George, you mentioned a number of times investors or investor, and we have a few questions about that issue. Who are the investors in Quintillion, and what are you looking for going forward in terms of future investments? Okay,
right now the company is owned and operated by U.S. investors. We have a small minority group at the holding company level that are Alaska Native organizations who have been affiliated with the project since 2015. But 93% of the company is owned by Cooper Investment Partners. Cooper Investment Partners is a private equity, private family office type of company that's based in New York and owned by U.S. citizens. And the investor into Cooper Investment Partners is a global family office, Access Industries, that is owned by by an individual who's US and UK citizen, and has been since the early 1980s. So going forward, I guess that depends on if our expansion is going to be something that would be through merger and acquisition, or whether it would be through new project development, or both. I think we're open to additional investors being involved with Quintillion, but we're not open to doing anything where we would have any issues with either the investment or the ownership or the type of equipment that we're using that would jeopardize our team telecom critical infrastructure status. So right now, all the electronics in our system are either Lucent Wave Gear or Sienna, both approved vendors of the United States government. We do not have any other elements in our network but those two. Our system was built by Alcatel Submarine Networks. It's done a ton of work for the U.S. government and will continue to do so. And going forward, we'll adhere to all of that in any new project that we do, or any new company that we work with.
Great, thank you. I want to switch a little bit to research. I have a question from our colleague Bruce Howe. He asks this question: has Quintillion considered adding sensors to the cable systems and repeaters for climate monitoring, disaster risk reduction, and cable integrity and security? And this is in reference to the UN Joint Task Force for Smart Subsea Cables, which is science monitoring and reliable telecommunications.
I'll take that, George. Yes, unfortunately under NDA, I can't talk in too much detail, but we are doing that right now. We're doing that as we speak. We have not expanded the concept much. We're really looking at this project that's underway, and it is a using fiber optics to sense as a sensing capability. It's with a national entity, and it's kind of like our project on the at the ground station. We're looking at a proof of concept, and then we'll expand on that. So I'd encourage the the individual who offered the question, maybe we can have an offline conversation about ideas. And so we are definitely open to that concept to the extent it it furthers the greater good. We're all in.
Okay, thank you. One more local Alaska question, and then I want to move to a couple of international questions. To boil down this question, the question really is: what local indigenous institutions has Quintillion worked with to build out your network? What kind of consultation have you had, and what kind of consultation will you have with local communities?
George, you may want to take that and go back to the original building, or I can take it and talk about current issues that are underway.
Yeah, why don't you start?
Okay. So for example, we are working with the city of Utqiagvik on a number of initiatives, particularly the ground station and expansion there. We're working with Bering Straits and also White Mountain and various entities in and around that area to expand services in the area. And we've also worked quite extensively with the folks at NANA as well. And there may be others, but those are the ones that we've recently been engaged with, involved with, and and working on various projects with. And I think that I would basically challenge anyone that if somebody picked up the phone and said, we'd like to work with Quintillion, we have an idea, we would lean into that quite seriously. So we're open to having those discussions across the board, wherever that can be of assistance, wherever that can help, wherever there's a good partnership. And hopefully the examples I've just laid out speak to that, but there's others as well.
Yeah, I think I would add that all of our current plans of what we have built had to be go through various licensing and approval processes with all of the landings that we made in the current network. In addition, we had permits that were reviewed and approved by Army Corps of Engineers, by Department of Resources, Natural Resources for the state of Alaska. So we had a very extensive process on the current network. As we look at building, one of the networks we're looking at building right now is a 3A network, which would go east of Prudhoe Bay and land in Tuktoyaktuk. We do have a Canadian landing license in hand, although it does not have this location as a landing. So as we move forward with that project, we are coordinating with the First Nation entities that are in and around Inuvik and Tuktoyaktuk, and we would do that in Nunavut as well if the cable system design went that direction. So there's a whole host of U.S. federal and current nation responsibilities and approvals, coordination that are environmental in nature, that are physical engineering in nature, that we have to be compliant with and coordinate with. And as far as the local communities go, they're the ones that are our eyes and ears on how we serve their communities. So we're going to continue to have them actively engaged in understanding what their needs and requirements are, so that as we design a system to come ashore, we'll be in a position to be able to serve those needs immediately upon turning up our service, either directly or indirectly through another partner that would already be perhaps the LEC in that market. So that's an essential part of what we do.
And just one other minor point to that is we do and have hired local liaisons to help us, make sure we're keeping an eye on, what's happening locally, and we're in tune with that, and we're aligned with it. So, and we have a number of those on the ground and currently employed, and that's their sole mission in life. Make sure we're facilitating those connections.
Thank you both. General Jacoby, we've got about 4 to 5 minutes left, generally here in the circumpolar north. What are the plans? What are the plans for Greenland, line into Greenland, and perhaps even connectivity to Iceland, but particularly Greenland, as it's so geostrategic, especially in the North American Arctic, but throughout the circumpolar north?
Right. Well, as probably a lot of the listeners know, we have a very important and longstanding United States Air Force base at Thule, Greenland. And of course, not just a increasingly significant relationship with Greenland and the local communities, which are recent activity by the current administration has really gotten behind, but also with Denmark as not just a NATO partner, but as a binational partner in a lot of activities. So Thule and Greenland are very important to us, and the connection and the waterways between Greenland and Canada are important were important to me as a NORAD commander and the Northcom commander, because of the avenues of approach for activity into our North American area of operations. So I think that the proposals that have been put forward and the plans that would allow Quintillion to expand capability, it's the same 4 gaps that exist in Greenland and exist in the Canadian High North that I talked about in our challenges in Alaska. It's all domain awareness. It's communications above 60. It's presence and infrastructure, all of them aided, and communities aided, as George and Mac have laid out, by extension of this very basic foundational capability of fiber optic cable. Now, many people know that Iceland during the Cold War played a critical strategic role and was a good friend, and we had a significant air base there in Iceland. And I will tell you that their strategic positioning now with the activity of great powers has just grown. And it's not, it's not a coincidence that China is investing heavily in their relationship with Iceland. And so, the competitors, we compete against a broad spectrum of things, from diplomatic to economic and informational, as well as military. And a lot of it is revolving around, the development and evolution of capabilities in the Arctic. So Quintillion's ability to expand capability to the east and to Europe and to Greenland is really enticing for somebody that is sitting here trying to figure out the best strategic way to increase redundancy, reliability, speed, and accuracy of communications and passing data, large amounts.
Thank you, General. Unfortunately, we've come to our end of the presentation. 90 minutes went by very fast. We could do another 90, I'm sure. I apologize to all those online who I was not able to get to all of your questions. We'll capture those and make sure that they get to the right individual within Quintillion.
I think we just lost Mike.
Maybe.
Mike, if you can hear us, we cannot hear you.
Well, on behalf of the Wilson Center, I can wrap this up and just say thank you very much to Quintillion for being here and to the leadership. And thank you everyone who has been watching.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michaela. Appreciate it.
Awesome job. Thanks, guys.